Ladies and gentlemen, panel 11, entitled Gaza War and the Middle East, a struggle for regional order, will start now.
Yeah. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I know it's always tough to moderate a session after lunch. We'll do our best to provide an insightful discussion, and we hope we can get you engaged in the question and answer session. So first, I would like to thank Dr. Ibtisam. As a fellow Arab woman, Dr. Ibtisam, for me, typifies the model of Arab women leaders, entrepreneurs, who do their work with grace and poise. And for that, I think all Arab women thank her for all her accomplishments and for the model she presents and provides for all Arab women. The organization that she has built, the team she has put together around her, the work they produce is just first caliber. Thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for the invitation, and thank you, EPC. The session is titled The Gaza War and the Regional Order, and the Middle East, a struggle for regional order. I would like first to just present the human face of the Gaza war and also of the Lebanon war. In terms of the death toll so far, as of 5 November 2024, over 45,000 people have died, 43,391 Palestinians, and 1,706 Israelis. 70% of the Palestinians who have died are women and children. There are among those reported killed, 134 journalists, 146 media workers, 120 academics, and over 224 humanitarian aid workers, including 179 employees of UNRWA. This is the human death toll and the human casualties. I'm not talking about the destruction that has eviscerated whole neighborhood and that has torn apart whole communities. They are not going to be rebuilt and rewoven together for generations to come. In Lebanon, since October 8, 2024, when Hezbollah launched its war of support of Gaza, the death toll until now, according to the Ministry of Health in Lebanon, is 3,240 people and 14,134 injured. This is a death toll that has exceeded by far the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war. 37 villages, 37, have been totally wiped out in the southern Lebanon, in the border area between Lebanon and Israel. There are no homes for people to go back to if the war were to end anytime soon. The destruction is not only in the south, it is in the southern suburbs of Beirut, it's in eastern Lebanon. There is no safe place in Lebanon anymore. As we speak today, right now, there are strikes taking place, Israeli strikes, on southern Lebanon, on eastern Lebanon, on the southern suburbs of Beirut, including the area where my family home is. So I don't know what's happening to my parents' home as we speak. So let's now turn to this session and talk about the impact of the Gaza war, of the Lebanon war, on the regional order, and what kind of struggle this is representing for the regional order. I have three excellent panelists here who have studied, analyzed, worked in the Middle East for years. And in my opinion, they are some of the best analysts and students of the region. To my left, I have Professor Vali Nasr. He's the Majid Qaddouri Professor of International Affairs and Middle East Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. Next to Dr. Nasr is Dr. Abdel Moneim Saeed, is a senator in the Egyptian Senate and a founding senior fellow at Brandeis University's Crown Center for Middle East Studies. Next to Dr. Saeed is Dr. Mansour Almarzoqi, the youngest of us all. He is the director of the Center for Strategic Studies at the Prince Saud Al Faisal Institute for Diplomatic Studies in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. So let's get started. I come from the background of conflict analysis and dialogues. And whenever I start a new dialogue or I enter a new conflict theater, you try to get a baseline, right? So having now been in the Gaza war for the last year and some, and recently Lebanon war, I would like to get a baseline of where the region is. What are those two trend lines, two major dynamics that you think are impacting the region as we speak today? And short responses, just to get an idea, to put some kind of a picture between the three of you among the three of you, of these regional dynamics affecting, the region right now. Dr. Abdel Moneim, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. and I will say the following. Number one, that we have the worst war that's known in the Middle East for a long time. I mean, just the statistics that you got, I'm sure that you can get more in previous wars that we have, the Iran-Iraq war or the other wars that we have. That's the worst. The worst inhuman also war. And this war is a result of a complex of factors that start with a very global, the US and Iran, in which there is a nuclear dimension. And you go down to the region, and you have a region that came out from the Arab Spring with one of the trends, other than the Islamists and the chaos and the civil wars, a trend for reform in the region. We were talking in the previous session about the UAE. UAE was leading, I will say, leading the pattern of progress and reform in the region. But after the Arab Spring, there was now Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, in which there is a serious kind of reform, not only for the economy, for the society, for women's status, for minorities, a lot of issues. In front of that, we have what's so-called the axis of resistance and rejection, or, you call it, al-muqawama wal-mumana'a. These two, between the two camps of the region, I think we have one of, I won't say the reasons, but one of the complexities that we have in this situation, in which there was a decision that was taken by Iran, really to disrupt the process for those who want to build the region from realizing their I will say, upper ceiling objectives of making in 2030 the region to have it as a better place than it was before. That will happen only through a process of peace, search for peace, stability in the region.
Thank Dr. Abdel Moneim. We are going to get that. We are now just analyzing the trend lines, and you have referred to two of them. So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to Vali. We are going to get back to the process, all right? So Dr. Vali.
So I would say very quickly, I mean, one is that this has not only been a devastating war, but it looks like a war that without an end. It's not very clear when it will stop and how much the damage would be. I think the most important development so far is first of all, the numbers that you mentioned. The number of people who have been displaced in Gaza will be, or have been in West Bank, in Lebanon, will be a factor going forward in of itself, and it's destabilizing to the region. I think the position of Iran and Israel, both in the region, has shifted significantly. I mean, Israel today is an insecure state more than it was before. What it lost in terms of deterrence and the sense of security of its population on October 7th, it hasn't got back. Iran similarly is out of its comfort zone, particularly with the Trump administration coming in. Its allies in the region, the axis of resistance has been badly battered. Its confrontations with Israel has actually exposed vulnerabilities. And even though its relations with the Arab world have improved in the meantime, it is, if you would, in an outside of its comfort zone. And finally, I would say the rest of the Arab world is also in a situation of insecurity. If you looked at Egypt and Jordan, their future is quite uncertain, given what might happen to the Palestinian population in Gaza and the West Bank. And the rest of the Arab world is also feeling the tremors of the anger on the Arab street, of the uncertainty of where this war would go. I mean, where we're sitting now in this region, you might wonder, when is it that the conflict between Iran and Israel and the conflict in the Levant may show up in this region? So I would say overall, you know, this many months past the start of the war, beyond the horrible numbers that we have of the deaths, the region as a whole is in a situation of tremendous insecurity.
Thank you. Dr. Almarzoqi.
First of all, thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Abdel and the Emirates Policy Center for kindly inviting me. Thematically, you have context, and the second you have is the state of affairs of the region. In terms of the context, you have the root causes of instability in the region, which we have been for the past 70 or 80 years shouting at the top of our lungs that you cannot have stability without a Palestinian state. And in each time that we have a crisis, a major crisis in the region, these root causes are confirmed. And the puzzling element is that no lessons are drawn from these repeated calls from, for example, Saudi Arabia. So you have a set of root causes for instability. The creation of a Palestinian state is chief among them, recognizing the human rights of the Palestinians, the right to self-determination, and so on and so forth. The other element of context is that you have a state of apartheid in Israel that is normalized by the West, supported, financed by the West, mainly by the United States of America, which made peace with the state of apartheid against all the publicly announced discourse on democracy, equality, etc. Then you have now a state of a genocide supported, aided, abetted by Western countries. You have exceptions, but mainly chief among which, again, is the United States of America, Germany, France, the UK, etc. You have every now and then shifts in their positions, but the main theme is that they have supported and normalized the Israeli apartheid, and now they are supporting and normalizing the Israeli genocide. As a consequence of these two elements, namely ignoring the root causes of instability, and normalizing and aiding and abetting apartheid and genocide, you have a third consequence, which is the collapsing of international credibility, the lack of reliability of international institutions. The United Nations is standing there paralyzed by American vetoes or the votes from some European countries against self-determination rights of Palestinians, as an example, or against a ceasefire, which in the beginning of the crisis became some sort of a dirty word. it wasn't allowed to utter a ceasefire or humanitarian assistance. You have lack of credibility for international law, lack of credibility and collapse of credibility of international institutions. This is the context. The state of affairs, number one, you are standing on the brink of an all-out war. You have aggression against the sovereignty of countries. The last one was Iran, which was condemned by Saudi Arabia. And for those who watched the Arab and Islamic Summit held in Riyadh yesterday, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, directly and specifically condemned the Israeli aggressions against Iranian sovereignty. And you have the element before last, you have islands of stability and prosperity. Saudi Arabia is an island of government institutions' efficiency, development projects, growth of economy, etc. An isolated island of stability within a chaotic region. You have the Emirates, which is another island of stability and success, but surrounded by failed states, surrounded by crises, surrounded by poverty. And one strategic concept that is stable in Riyadh is that we can never grow alone. Everyone needs to come out of the lines of poverty so that we can succeed and grow. And the last point, a consequence of a long line of events and series of events, is that Saudi Arabia, and Riyadh specifically, has become the capital of the two-state solutions. And this takes place in a context of failure of the quartet, which were sidelined and marginalized by the United States of America, so that they and Israel will alone decide the future of the peace process. But now Saudi Arabia is forming a global alliance, excluding the United States of America, which is a firm position, refusing invitations from countries such as Germany, because there is a problem of trust in their role and their faithfulness to the two-state solution.
Thank you. Dr. Abdel Moneim, if you can pick up on what Mansour said in terms of processes for addressing, and you were talking about processes for addressing the Gaza war, and Egypt has been one of the three countries leading a mediation effort for reaching a ceasefire in Gaza. And, you know, there was a temporary ceasefire last November, but since then there has not been success for different reasons, you know. Both stakeholders at different times rejected that. So if we can talk about processes of what are these approaches to managing the Gaza war and not resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but at least to manage the war and to get to a ceasefire. What are these other processes that are needed?
I think we have to study a little bit. I know we study very much the whole wars, but peace processes, we don't study it well. The successful events in which there was a peace in the Middle East between parties, particularly the Israelis and one of the Arabs or some of the Arabs, actually it was by direct talks. President Saeed went to Jerusalem, and when he went to Jerusalem, he came into peace in opposition of President Carter at the time. President Carter at the time wanted to have an international conference attended by the Soviet Union, and those who were opposing any rapprochement with Israel or trying to solve the problem. Sadat did this, changed the environment that we were in, and the end was the liberation of every centimeter of Egyptian soil. That's happened with King Hussein. That happened even with Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat, when we sat with the Israelis in Oslo, came up with an agreement in which produced the first Palestinian authority on Palestinian territories in history. The results of that we know after that, because there was other elements that came into the process. My assumption right now that all what was said about Israel is true, that the Western support was really heavy, not only that sending any kind of diplomatic support. No, it was not diplomatic support. It was weapons that killed people at the end. So here, what we have, my promise here and reliance is a regional solution to regional problems, particularly the Palestinian problem in front of it. But I will say in this case, we are carrying also something called the Jewish question, which something is still hanging in the neck of the West, whether in Eastern Europe or in the United States. The Jewish question about the anti-Semitism that's happening, that threatened the lives of Jews and led to Zionist ideas as an essence of Israeli or Jewish nationalism. The other side, on the Palestinian one, they are doing what we are doing because their nationalism is coming from a process of decolonization that started, attempted decolonization from the Crusaders to the Zionism now. To deal with that, that happens only through direct talks. And I will say, all the things that came in the final declaration yesterday in Riyadh was fine, was great, it was accurate. It defined well the Arab and the Islamic position. However, I will say, we are not telling the other side what we want really. We want either Israel have two-state solutions, one Palestinian, but also the Israeli one will be integrated into the region. I mean, that is here, unless we come to the conceptual difference between Palestinian nationalism and Israeli nationalism, we will not be crossing the real one that brings us a war that is, by the way, for those who don't know, the 5th Gaza war. The 5th. There was 4 before it. So we have a repetition of wars almost every year or 2 years, whether between Israel and the Palestinian, or Israel with the Lebanese, or Israel and the Syrians. That is something that's not tenable to any project that we have to progress in Saudi Arabia, Emirates, the Gulf States, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, the countries that did not fail in front of the Arab Spring. They did not fail in trying to resume their process of building their countries. I think that's needed. Unfortunately, until now, we didn't make that offer. It is there in the back stages of the theater we have right now. However, it is not yet translated into a choice to the Israeli people. I'm not here talking about Smotrich or Gaver. These are all, fanatics, religious people who want to really expand the occupation to the West Bank and kick the Gazans out of it. I mean, that's on anyone, I'm sure a lot of you read Bob Woodward, that when Blinken asked Netanyahu what you intend to do, he said, we will make a safe passage and let the Palestinian go.
Okay.
Again, we will have the Nakba again and again and again. That's got to stop.
Thank you. Dr. Vali, what's your take on this regional framework and where Iran will fit in that?
I mean, I do think that the
أعتقد أن
responsibility for its security, but I don't think that's right now feasible. Because I don't think actually, as Dr. Moneim said, Israel is right now in the mood to basically agree to a Palestinian state in exchange for being integrated into the region. Its objective seems to be a maximal objective of, if not expanding into all of West Bank and Gaza, even if we said that's just a marginal extremist view, there seems to be a consensus in Israel that it's going to solve all of its security problems all at once. With the Palestinians around it, with Lebanon, with the Houthis, and with Iran, one at a time. And so you start in Gaza, then you go to Lebanon, then you go to Houthis and to Iran. And in that kind of a framework, I don't think the regional powers, first of all, the protagonist here is not the Arab world. The protagonist is Iran and Hezbollah, etc. And the leverage that the Arab world has on mediating a kind of a ceasefire between Iran and Israel is, in my opinion, next to zero. It has leverage with neither side. The Arab world has neither leverage with Israel, nor does it have leverage with Iran. And the international community, and particularly the Biden administration, also was not willing to step in either. So you have to have that kind of a leadership from the outside that is willing to sort of push for some kind of a ceasefire between the axis of resistance and Israel at this point in time. And then the Arab world, of course, can play a major role in the middle. But I think we're far from that idea that we can have a regional order that the region itself can put forward.
Thank you. Mansour, Dr. Almarzoqi, there has been quite a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We have recently seen the chiefs of staff, military chiefs of staff of both countries meeting, conversation between the Crown Prince and the Iranian president. So is there leverage on Iran?
Well, if you allow me quick comments. Number one is that there is a collapse of Western moral authority. And this affects their credibility, be it with mediation or efforts for peace, etc. The Western moral authority has collapsed, no more. And this has consequences. Second, Israel is not a force of occupation. I think this is a mischaracterization of the state of affairs. Israel is a settler, colonial power, and there is a huge difference embodied by the fact that the Israelis, and this go way before the 7th of October, it's a major trend. The government that we see in Israel is a consequence of these trends, the rise of Orthodox Judaism, electoral base, etc. within Israel. Settler colonialism is predicated on completely erasing, killing, or forcing out Palestinians. And this is an important distinction to make. In terms of the regional order, it was destroyed by the American invasion of Iraq. Against all advice from the Saudi Arabian officials at the time. The last effort that Saudi Arabia made is that asking the US, do you have an alternative after destroying the security architecture of the region? And they had none. And look at the state of affairs. Iran recently has asked, actually, Arabian Gulf countries to mediate, the last of which was Saudi Arabia, but before that it was Oman, before Oman was Qatar. And the mediation efforts that Iran asked of those Arabian Gulf countries varied from delivering messages of detente, of not wanting escalation, to trying to find an exit from the tit-for-tat hit, then the counterattack, etc. Do they have leverage to impose consequences on Iran to respect an outcome of mediation effort? I don't think that anyone has leverage on Iran in that regard, with a minor discussion perhaps on China, which is standing alone as the only window into the international banking system, flow of capital, technology, etc., with the second country, Russia, being bogged down in Ukraine. So its heavy reliance on China suggests that China is perhaps the most influential when it comes to putting pressure on Iran. Now, back to the detente between Saudi Arabia. There are 2 points important to take into consideration. One, it's not an agreement on issues. It is merely an agreement of a table of discussion. Let's have an organized forum of discussing our disagreements. And second, so this is the first objective. Second, it is an agreement to put a cap on tensions. Let's not get things go worse or go south. In that regard, the detente could be understood through different lenses. Iran came to the table and agreed to this detente, which it had, by the way, refused for almost 30 years. So the question, if we agree on the premise, why did it accept what it had previously refused? And I think it comes from a position of strategic weakness. On the one hand, Qarabagh, Iraq, Syria, involvement in Ukraine, isolation, and the prospects of reviving the nuclear deal, or the internal demonstrations. That's on the one hand. On the second hand, wanting to make Saudi Arabia exit any potential confrontation with Israel or the US, and breaking the isolation that the US and Israel has succeeded in building around Iran. And Iran succeeded in breaking that isolation. There was a team within Iran, the Iranian, different little Irans inside Iran. It's not just the institutions of the presidencies. You have the IRGC, you have the institution of the Supreme Guide, etc. Some of those influential actors were against the agreement with Saudi Arabia, and they were proved wrong in the recent developments, and the détente proved to be a useful element for Iran. I am mildly optimistic, but I am more inclined to pessimism. I think Iran has invested so much in a network of militias. I don't understand why would anyone in Iran give up those militias around the region just because they made an agreement with Saudi Arabia. If we accept this premise, I think that there is a high probability that Iran will go back to the same activities once it rises up from the strategic weakness position.
Building on what Dr. Almarzoqi said, Dr. Saeed, you were referring to the axis of resistance, and I'm trying to hark back to something that Dr. Gargash said yesterday, when he said we need a productive dialogue, we meaning the Arabs, a productive dialogue with Turkey and Iran. But political tools are lacking. So building on the discussion that we have heard, the talk from Dr. Almarzoqi, one political tool has been the table for discussion, an agreement on a table of discussion. What other political tools are needed going forward that are not being used right now?
Are you asking?
Yes, yes.
Well, I guess we have one just yesterday. Yesterday when we have the Arab Islamic Conference.
Okay.
And that's not the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, Saudi Arabia, that's new in Arab diplomacy, Middle East diplomacy, to put Arab and Islamists together. And so that was an opportunity. As I remember, Kissinger defined détente as a management of adversarial relationship. And I think that's a good idea. I mean, Iran is part of the region, Turkey is part of the region. They are part of a lot of history in the region. But on the other hand, we have something here that really is very much destructive. The destruction started with, the four capitals of the Arab states, in Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and then I will say also working on the division within the Palestinian National Authority, and when Hamas, took over Gaza and make that kind of split. Anti-state, particularly even the formation of a state, is the most dangerous thing in our region. It is the main enemy, in my opinion, of the attempt to be with what we call it in the last session, how to be part of the people and states that are growing, having a higher share in technology, and all the idea of progress and change. It is either to be in that camp or you try to stay as you are within ideologies that one comes after another. And these ideologies is try to make from any conflict or any differences a kind of a sacred process related to the Almighty or related, and that's already happening also in the Israeli side. That's a kind of a very disturbing situation for the entire region. It came exactly in the moment in when Saudi Arabia was destined in starting a process of reconciliation with Israel. That's called normalization. And Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman really was talking in the Fox News, in 2 weeks only before what happened on October 7th, that saying that we are very close to do a deal with the other side. At the same time, Oman and Saudi Arabia and others allowed their skies to be open to the Israeli. There was steps tried to, make it flexible, the process of making that kind of a historical deal with the Israelis. Now this deal is broken. It's broken because Iran really took the initiative, because it found that the deal with Saudi Arabia will mean a big change in the strategic situation in the Middle East, because it involves a Saudi-American agreement on security. That makes, I think, people in Tehran very disturbed with this reality, that will change the balance. And therefore, initiating what happened, I think history will get us more information about what I am saying. But I am saying logically, kind of a deductive theory, thinking that we were coming into a situation that either we will take the region forward or it has to be broken down. Now, can we restore that situation again?
Okay.
I think it's very important that we can, because we have 9 countries who signed a declaration on October 21st that started by saying that they condemn every hostility or aggression on civilian population.
Yeah.
That denounced both the October 7th attack on the Israelis and what Israel did, which was very close to a very genocidal situation.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Doctor, because you are leading us into a very good direction in terms of the next
I
step.
want to say
Yes.
something, two
Yes.
sentences. I will say we have 6 countries among these 9 countries who got already peace treaties with Israel.
Yeah.
And I assume these 6 countries, plus the countries that very close to the point that we will start a process and strategy to bring peace to the Middle East.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. Dr. Nasr, you and I and others have been involved in a number of Track 2 dialogues on regional security, and I've always found the discussion around non-state armed actors the most difficult to do. There is defensiveness on the Iranian side, and there is true, I'd say, apprehension, there is true concerns from the Arab side on what these non-state actors have been doing to the state system in the Arab region. And we have seen the consequences of that. So the question going forward, how can we fashion a productive discussion between Arabs and Iranians on this issue? Or at this stage, we cannot have this conversation. Because as you are hearing, this is an important part that we need to address as we are talking about building a region that is responsible, that is inclusive, but also responsible for its security.
I think it's a very good point. I mean, this is obviously a complex issue because there's an Iran part to it, but there's also a failed state part to it.
Correct.
And the idea of reconstructing states like Lebanon, it's not a matter of only Iran getting away. Lebanon's last census was in 1932.
Correct.
I mean, that country needs a whole new constitution. It needs a new state. It's not just a matter of Iran supporting Hezbollah. Similarly with Houthis. Iran may opportunistically have taken advantage of some of these failed state situations, but it's not necessarily always the cause of the failed states. So this is a larger issue. But I think one of the key issues, and I'm listening to my colleagues here, it's very important to note that, litigating the past is not very helpful in terms of going forward. October 7th and the Gaza war is a watershed for the Middle East. There is no snap back to before October 7th. This region is going to be changed completely by this. As we are talking, and if you're going to have a constructive conversation about militias, about peace, etc., it has to be about each side's threat perceptions of the other. Right now, the idea of a larger war in the region is not between the Arabs and Israelis or between Iran and the Arabs. It used to be. 5 years ago, we would have thought about a Saudi-Iranian or a war in the Gulf. We don't think about that. The only way in which we're going to have a larger war in this region is between Iran and Israel.
Correct.
So these are the two protagonists, and the axis of resistance has to be seen in that context. And the issue of militias now is part of the Israel-Iran dynamic. The militias are no longer in this poise towards the Arab world and the Arab system as they were before. They're not going to be solved now unless the Iran-Israel issue is solved. And even if you looked at the Arab world today, is it really true that across the Arab world, the threat perception is Iran? I mean, if you're sitting in Jordan, if you're sitting in Egypt, the biggest threat to these countries right now is what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the West Bank and what's happening in Lebanon. So you cannot sort of make this argument, we cannot have the argument that we had before October 6th about what the militias were doing and transpose that to what the situation is today. So I think a constructive discussion within the region should not be about the past, should be about the reality that the Arabs and Iranians are looking at. I would say that, you know, when the détente happened with Saudi Arabia, at the beginning was very tentative. Why has it accelerated so fast? Why is it that yesterday Prince Mohammed bin Salman went so out of his way to defend Iranian sovereignty? Is because in Saudi Arabia, and I'm guessing, I delegate this to my colleague here, that the threat perception about what is a security threat to Saudi Arabia has shifted, right? And I think we have to start from that point of view. What is the situation this region is facing? What are the main threat perceptions to security to individuals and to the region as a whole? And then you could basically get Iran and the Arabs, and potentially down the road Israel, to a point to have a conversation about reconstructing this region in a way that threat perception to everybody goes down. But we have to be sort of look at this realistically.
Thank you. Dr. Almarzoqi, if building on what Dr. Nasr has just said, so are we seeing a new regional order in formation post-October 7, or is it an acceleration of all trends that were shaping a regional order and that are being now means tested by the Gaza war and the Lebanon war?
Conceptually speaking, regional orders are a function of the international order. Until you have some sort of stability at the international level, not only in the Middle East, but in Eastern Europe, South Asia, and different geopolitical regions in Africa, Latin America, you can't have stability at a regional level because with great powers competition, you have a rise of regionalism. So those competitions translate into different geopolitical regions. So the notion that we can have a regional order now, while we have chaos at the international level, it's difficult for me to imagine. That's from a conceptual standpoint. But if I may make some corrections to some of the information. His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman's interview, which His Excellency referred to on Fox News prior to the 7th of October, didn't say we are close. Vocabulary is important. Language is important. It's not by chance that we pioneer Arabic literature. It matters. He said we are getting closer. The journalist from Fox News asked, are you close? And he said, every day closer. He systematically avoided using the word close. We are getting closer. And he said, the Palestinian issue is important to us, and it should be dealt with in a realistic but reliable, backtracked. Once you commit yourself to a solution or a path to a solution, you cannot withdraw from it. That's part of the Saudi Arabian demands. The other element is that you don't have one Iranian expansionist militia model. You have the Lebanese model with Hezbollah, which Iran failed to replicate elsewhere. It created Hezbollah of Hijaz in Saudi Arabia, but it failed. So you have a second model of militia creation in Iraq, more than 48 failed and successful experiences. Then you have a third approach to militias from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from different places in Syria. And you have a fourth approach, which is the one towards the Houthis in Yemen. You don't have one single approach. Yes, it started in Lebanon as a means of retaliation for Israel because it didn't have, Iran didn't have ballistic missiles at the time. But after words, in Iraq, it became an element for absorbing Iraq, influencing Iraq, dominating Iraq. And later, it became a tool of expansionism. It has nothing to do with Iranian security. It has so much to do with Iranian expansionist projects within Syria, within Bahrain, within Kuwait, the Abdel, etc., etc. So that's an important point to make. There is a conceptual problem that we regularly face when talking to our brothers in Iran, which is the concept of sovereignty. There is this idea that the Supreme Guide is the representative of God, and God doesn't recognize borders. All of the planet Earth belongs to God, and therefore, as a consequence, the representative of God should stop at no borders. So the influence within Iraq or within Bahrain or elsewhere does not recognize, from a conceptual point of view, does not recognize the concept of sovereignty, which is problematic when it comes to the nation state. This is why the Saudi Arabian debates about Iran, there is this argument that there is a conflict within Iran between the revolution and the nation state. And this conflict hasn't been settled yet. And this has consequences on us. As to the 7th of October and trying to link it with efforts of normalization between potential normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, I think this is an inaccurate evaluation. Why? From an operational standpoint, such an operation couldn't have been prepared within 2 months or 3 months, at least from 2 to 3 years, according to some military estimations. So it had major objectives, and later, as a bonus, as a cherry on the gâteau, on the cake, derailing those efforts. But the main strategic objectives are elsewhere. Namely, do not forget the Palestinian issue, and second, nobody can forget the Palestinian issue. And the Saudi Arabian involvement goes way beyond this. In 1981, the custodian of the two holy mosques, then King Fahd, proposed the Faz Declaration, peace and recognition of Israel, full relations, cultural, economic, political, etc., in exchange for recognizing the right of Palestinians to exist. This is how low our expectations of Israelis. Just recognize their right to exist. And the second Saudi Arabian peace initiative under the custodian of the two holy mosques, then King Abdel, in 2001, adopted in the Beirut Arab Summit, which became later the Arab Peace Initiative. And the third major declaration or initiative by Saudi Arabia is leveraging the negotiations with the US. And this has nothing to do with Israel from a Saudi Arabian point of view, according to my understanding. It has everything to do with the great powers competitions for the US. They couldn't afford to lose Saudi Arabia, a middle-sized power, rising economy, etc. And for Saudi Arabia, wanting to localize tech capacities, etc. But Israel was a palleting tactic from an American point of view, and later it developed into a strategic vision of the region that is predicated on a role of Israel. And even then, systematically, Saudi Arabia has insisted that without a Palestinian state, we will not have relations with Israel. And it is puzzling to me how much refusal to take Saudi Arabian government at their words. Why not accept this?
Yes, constantly in the States. I mean, read their statements. You know, they have been saying this, and still people are refusing to accept that somehow. Yes. So, Dr. Saeed, so if we are thinking about a new regional order, you know, and I think I take Mansour's premise that you cannot have one regional order without, in the midst of an international order that is in flux. But assuming we start the task of building a regional security architecture, what are the 1-2 principles that should guide us? Any project at building a security architecture has to start with principles. What are the 1-2 principles that should guide this project?
Historically, wars did not lead only to destruction, but also it allows people to rethink their situation and sometimes become innovative and creating something new. You know, after the Second World War, we got a hell of a change in the international system by the creation of the UN, UNESCO, all the things that may cause wars later. And after the war in Vietnam, there was a big wake-up call in Southeast Asia and East Asia, in which led us to ASEAN and the very developing China and the very developing others that we are talking about. Now we are in the region. We have this one. And as Dr. Mansour said, you know, about the Saudi Arabia started in the Fez declaration by talking about the possibilities of peace. That happened after the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. And then that progressed in this, you know, in Beirut when the Arab Peace Initiative was on the table. We have to know that the Israelis were very intransigent. They were not very, you know, forthcoming into this very important initiative. But as, you know, corrected me Mansour about the difference between getting closer or getting close. I mean, that is, you know, probably in the Arabic language would be much more clear. But in English, it is that there is a major effort there in making a kind of a new settlement in the region. And I guess that was very promising initiative that to do this. The first principle that I will say that we will do now is we have to come in something that I will say reform the Palestinian system, because the differentiation between arms and politics in the Palestinian Authority was really part of the dilemma we are in now. Second, we need a reform of the Israeli system. Israeli system that allow now, you know, this kind of real fascist racial kind of response to what's happening is really creating the way for the kind of what they call it forever wars. You know, if that will be the case, it is between Judaism and Islam, or Islam and Christianity, or Anglicans, or whatever. That is the worst thing that happened to any continent in the world. Number three, I believe that we have the will and the structure and the wish really to have a world in the region that's based on nation states. And nation states means with all the rulings that come with it, respect of territories, respect of sovereignty, non-intervention in internal affairs, allow people really to flourish and to change by themselves. And that's already, I will say, happening in the region. It's not felt much in the Western world, but it's felt in the region. And now we have maturity enough to make sure. I mean, one of the sessions was about the forgotten wars in Sudan, Syria, Libya, and others. That's exactly because the nation state is not mature enough. I mean, countries who make civil wars are people who create citizens that can hate each other to the degree to kill each other. But countries that can make the control and also the progress enough to allow the country to move from one step to another. So I think we are there. And I think if, as I said, on the 9 countries that make that initial declaration in the beginning of this war, it's about time that they make a comprehensive strategy to how we will deal not only with Israel, with Turkey, with Iran. I can imagine the day in which Iran and Turkey and Israel will become observers of the Arab League, for instance.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. Dr. Nasr, I agree with you. The Israeli-Iranian conflict axis is going to determine a lot of the tempo, political tempo of the region going forward. So with a new US administration, the Iranian-US axis is going to have a big part on that regional axis, the Iranian-Israeli, but also on the regional dynamics. Where do you see this is going forward with the new incoming US administration?
Well, I mean, I'm not optimistic. Let me put it this way. Even about all of this conversation, I'm not optimistic because I think, in some ways, it's right now like a three-dimensional chess. Because there is, as Dr. Mansour said, there is an issue that has been there between the militias and the Arab world and Iran. But then the militias are also not part of Iran and Israel situation. So the Houthis started as being lobbing missiles at UAE and Saudi Arabia. Now they're lobbing missiles at Israel. And then there is the issue of Israel and the Arab world, which is about the Palestinians. So, you have three separate pieces of this moving. And I just don't see the US administration either thinking along these lines or being prepared to tackle these things at the same time. I mean, we can all talk about how do you pressure Iran with more sanctions, more pressure, or hitting them, or by persuasion through engagement, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, to move in what direction. But who is actually going to influence Israel? Right? That's the big other gorilla in the ring here. I mean, we're talking about a post-October 7 world, right? So who is going to basically put pressure on Israel that you cannot have maximal, for instance, security goals in Lebanon? When does the war in Lebanon end? What happens to the population in Gaza? Are they allowed to go back? What happens to reconstruction? I mean, you cannot really begin to talk about a regional order right now, at this moment, and I'm talking about 5 years ago, at this moment, without addressing what's happened to Gaza and what is happening to Lebanon. This war has to stop there. The regional order has to start with ceasefire, first in Gaza and then in Lebanon, and then you can then basically see how you address all of this. I think the Arab world can provide a lot of input because they do have relations with Washington. They might be able to influence the thinking. But I'm not optimistic that either US is ambitious enough or this administration would have the right people to think along these ways. So I actually see that, we're going to drift. We're going to drift along this edge of crisis. And then there is always that, hanging issue of Iran's nuclear program, which is we haven't discussed, which, how does the US going to deal with that? Is Iran actually going to cross the threshold? Is there going to be some kind of a military action there? Is sanctions going to increase on Iran? But all of these things are happening at the same time. And I do think, the region, I think, perhaps is thinking along the ways that these things are interconnected. And you have to think about them all at the same time.
But can you really tackle them all at the same time? I mean,
no, I think
it's better to negotiate one at a time.
No, I think
right?
the region, you have to, there is no, I think, Versailles Treaty moment.
Exactly.
So I think the region has to start with a series of ceasefires.
Yes.
The first ceasefire is in Gaza. That war has to end. The second ceasefire is in Lebanon. Yeah. Then there has to be some kind of a virtual ceasefire for now between Iran and Israel. Yeah. That, as was mentioned, that the war between Iran and Israel should not become a routine event in the region, yes. Right? And then fourth, you can think about a ceasefire on the nuclear front between Iran and the United States. Then, the region, realistically, we need to be able to breathe for a little bit. Yes. Like we've been running at a pace, the weight of events coming at us. The region has to be able to take a breath, assess things, and then you think about how you move forward.
Would you like to add to what Dr. Nasr has said?
Really quickly, there are 3 points that encourage me, unlike the normal state of affairs, but I am a little bit optimistic. Number one is that for the first time, the Palestinian question has become an internal politics question within the US. It's too early to judge the reasons for the loss of Harris, but some arguments suggest that there might be something to do with the genocide, the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Second, so in internal politics, we have seen this in France, we have seen this in the UK, we have seen this in Germany. For the first time, Palestine has become an internal politics issue within these countries, so there is a cost. The second element of optimism is that for the first time you have the announced presence of regional actors, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, Iran, as middle-sized powers. This is a new development, a welcome development. And for the first time, and this is point number 3 for optimism, is the rise of what is called the Global South. There are alternatives. It is difficult for me to imagine the genocide case being brought against Israel in the International Court of Justice if we didn't have an environment of maneuver created as a margin of action by the rise of middle-sized powers, us among them, and the rise of the Global South. 2 concluding points. One is that the strategic posture of Saudi Arabia is a little bit different from that of Iran, and this may be a source of disagreements in the near future. Saudi Arabia is building an advantageous position of being in the middle. Possibilities of normalizing with Israel, but rapprochement with Iran, and which proved very, very useful, these relations with Iran, and the potential of the Iranian economy and market is huge. So in the middle, between the US and China, not losing the middle position. This is a point of difference vis-a-vis Iran. It's not clear to me what is the strategic posture of Iran. The other element, which is the last point, is that there is a huge crisis of international legitimacy. And for the first time, middle-sized powers are contributing to resolving or trying to provide solutions. Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Turkey, South Africa, etc. So providing reliable solutions, credible solutions to addressing the problems of legitimacy of the international order.
Thank you. Do we have time to take questions? Yeah? How much? 5 minutes? Okay. Quickly then, I have 3 people who have asked to, who are on my list, requested to make questions. And please, just ask the questions, no commentary. I start first with Mr. Aude Aburdeni, please.
I have a comment and a tiny question.
Can you just restrict to the question, please?
Okay, I mean, we're talking about a ceasefire. You cannot have a ceasefire without the US, whether we like the US or not. For the past 13 months, many superpowers, small powers have tried, but so far, nothing has happened. So without the US, we're not going to go anywhere.
So what's the question, Mr. Aude?
We need the US to get involved. Without US involvement, we're just talking bullshit.
Okay, thank you. So the question, I think, if I can translate it into a question, do we see the US getting involved under the Trump administration in a more credible, effective way to get Israel to a ceasefire? Given, but let me take all the questions. Second question, Dr. Al-Ghashian, Abdelaziz Al-Ghashian.
Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Mansour, thank you very much. I think it was an interesting exchange that you had with Dr. Randa about that the Saudis were always saying that there's a Palestinian state, Palestinian state, Palestinian state. But this is the question that I want to ask. There seems to be a constant process of rebuffing Saudi statements time and again. Whenever there is a statement that says there's a, Prince Faisal bin Farhan put an op-ed. The Crown Prince spoke to the consultative body and said, we will not normalize and have diplomatic relations with Israel unless there is a Palestinian state. Yet 2 days after, there was a statement saying that the Crown Prince did not care about the Palestinian issue. There seems to be a constant process of trying to rebuff Saudi statements. How can we overcome that? So it's a bit of a reflective question, which leads to the second question to Dr. Abdel Moneim, which is, you talked about reform, about the Palestinians and Israelis. What can we do to improve the Arab Peace Initiative? Is there anything that we could expand upon the Arab Peace Initiative and make it more explicit? Is there any revision that we have to do there? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last question, but not least, is Dr. Sajjadpour.
Yes.
Question, please.
Yeah, thank you. My question is where Israel is headed. So all this discussion relates to Gaza and to the Palestinian plight, but what is the reading of the panelists on the Israeli situation not just long away, just in middle range?
Thank you, Dr. Sajjadpour. I think the first question, maybe Vali, you could address it, Dr. Nasr, about do you see Trump, one, interested in investing himself in reaching a ceasefire? Two, is he willing to exert pressure on Israel to get to a ceasefire? Which Biden, use leverage, including his unpredictability. That's a leverage also.
So my own sense is that the Biden administration had the will, did not have the capability.
Exactly.
I think it remains to be seen that whether Trump has the will, but if he has the will, he will have the capability. I think a Republican administration, particularly him, is much better placed to actually get his way with Israel than the Biden administration was.
Thank you. Dr. Al-Mansouri, if you can address Dr. Al-Ghashian question, please.
There is a systematic refusal to take the word of Saudi Arabian governments. It's not a new phenomenon. It's as old as 3 or 4 decades. It's difficult to explain why, but some of the reasons that I have looked into in a systematic way has to do with the propaganda efforts of Israeli government, successive, not just the present one. They have a tendency of over-inflating things for internal or external purposes. So the propaganda thing, Israel, it is headed into a major internal as well as external crises. If you look at the electoral landscape within Israel, it has already been transformed. You have the rise of orthodox, religious, fanatical powers who have an influence. They brought Smotrich. He's a consequence of this rise. They have tendencies of not working, studying the Old Testament, etc. And this comes with a systematic denial of the mere existence of any Arab. And if you observe the discourse of Israeli governments, they tend systematically to avoid the word Palestinian. Instead, they rely on the word Arab, etc. And internationally, the power of the Israeli lobby within the US is declining. The electoral bases within the United States of America are changing. The landscape is being transformed with different demographic factors, etc. The cost of la carte blanche given to Israel is rising in terms of international law, international institutions. Even the US efforts to contain China are partially being derailed by its blind support for Israel, and I believe in cost. I think that cost will have consequences.
To contain China in the region.
Come again?
To contain China in the region. US efforts to contain China in the region.
In the region and beyond.
Okay.
Because the region is part of...
Yeah. Dr. Saeed, if you can answer the question about the API, what can be improved? What can be done about it?
I believe that, again, I said that the solution will be from the region. Historically, all the attempts to reconcile or to even, a declaration that made in Saudi Arabia reformed the relationship between Turkey and Egypt, Qatar and Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Always regional initiative can really produce something. But waiting until if Trump will decide or not, that's on the hands of the American people. They decided to have this kind of president, they got it. And also, if China is going to come, I'm not relying on what others will do. Okay. Always, I hope this, when we have a conference like this in the UAE, we think of how intra-Arab politics can produce a solution. We are not going to replace Israel as an enemy with Iran. Iran is part of this region, historically very important part. And however, the idea of having a detente, I agree, that's a good point, that we try to solve problems together. So therefore, I will say again, that the issue will be in our hand. Reliance on international legitimacy, thank you very much. I mean, that's good to have the world like a state in which there are laws, but I don't know where international legitimacy when there was a Vietnam War.
Yeah. Okay.
The issue was not even offered to the UN in the first place. And 3 million people died there. there is no nice wars. Wars are the worst enemy of people because people are created to, build earth and really make good deeds in earth. So wars are not a nice thing, ever. It's about killing, actually. So therefore, I will say that's, again, I insist, without having an initiative from the region, here after that will come the role of the United States, the European Union, and all other actors. But before that happens, I don't think what we will have, nothing but what we have seen so far, and it's very ugly.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.